I guess the best place to start is by asking you about your experience as a reader when you were a kid. Were you a big reader of kids' books?
Look, I lived in the country, in a quite isolated country north of South Australia, in quite isolated place. So I didn't have a lot of books available to me. And so I can't honestly say that I was an avid reader, but it doesn't mean I didn't seek books out and love them. I remember my nana, Lucy Armin, gave me a beautiful book called When We Were Very Young by A. A. Milne. And we would march together, her and I, down to the single soldier statue that was in this tiny rural town to the rhythm of their changing guards at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice and we'd march down and salute the soldier. So my love of words, and it started from there, and storytelling. And my dad would, a farmer, work from dawn till dusk, but he would come in at night, and I'm the youngest of 8 children. So we all had the youngest of us had turns with dad sitting on his lap, and he wouldn't he wouldn't read us stories or books. He'd read the stock journal to us, and it was just a reading experience. And he'd just sit with us, and I sort of think back and I think I don't really know what he was talking about. It was just the proximity of being with him and being close to him, and seeing the oil stain that looked like a map of Africa on his hat, and feeling so beautifully warm, and that's the sense that reading and sharing stories I've carried through with me all my life, I think.
I think that's such a nice way of thinking about those early reading experiences and how much they can be tied to these warm and positive moments of
Yeah,
connections. That's really lovely.
real moments, yeah, of impact.
I guess my next question then is, what was your journey towards becoming a writer for children? So you had these lovely experiences where you would seek out books, you made them part of your day-to-day life. How did that turn into, oh, I think I want to write these?
Um, Look, my first dream was to be a rock and roll star. So, Cassie, I had a ponytail, sadly, and wore funny pants called flares, and started to write lyrical, very bad lyrical poetry, really, I guess, wanting to create the lyrics of the music I was listening to, because I'm very heavily into music also. And so I was trying to write, the Bob Dylan stuff, the Bruce Springsteen, the poetry at the time that I was listening to. And so that's how I started, just putting pen to paper. But there's always an impactful moment, I think, for many writers. And for me, one of my brothers died in a car accident. And in order for me to make sense of that as a young person, I turned to writing. And I haven't stopped since, to be honest with you. It just wasn't necessarily to be published. It was to make sense of things. And then I started teaching in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, in what was sort of a low socioeconomic area. And I started to write nonsense rhymes for the children I was teaching. And someone said, you should try and get them published. So, of course, I thought I was brilliant and it was going to be easy. And, I'd write something and next week I'll be famous. But it took me nearly 8 years of constant rejection before I had one accepted. But once I'm a quietly determined person, and once I got that bug, I just couldn't let go. And so here I am now, 30 years later, 30 or 40 years later.
And how many books later is it exactly? I
Look,
couldn't count.
I have to be honest, I don't know exactly. I don't want to feel like I'm keeping score. So it's over 100 now. But I did cut my teeth in educational publishing with Rigby Heinemann and Macmillan Education, doing a lot of books for their schemes and things. So, but I count them all because, yeah,
So you should.
very proud of them all. So
I
yes, it's been a long journey.
Yeah, and I love the way that you talked about how this came about through your teaching, because I wanted to ask you about how being a teacher influenced your writing and how writing influenced your teaching. So it sounds like it came together kind of organically, sort of in the classroom.
Look, it certainly did, and when I started teaching, there was a big push towards something called choral reading from America, and the first I saw of big books arrived in the classroom, these giant books with Morris Sendak stories, and And they were American, of course, but you know, just being able to immerse myself in that sort of literature was wonderful. Sorry, my email's bouncing there. My apologies. Yeah, so it's it, and once I was immersed in it, I wanted so much to be one of those people that wrote something that might impact children, like the words I was reading and the stories I was sharing in my class. Yeah, it became a very deep-seated desire.
And that really makes me want to ask you about your really lovely new book, Footprint, and how I guess the first question I'll ask is, how do you describe what it's about? How do you talk about it to people?
Look, it's not a picture book that fits into the regular framework, because of the use of you, obviously, and it's not a narrative of engaging one character, or it's very difficult to describe and to put it into a box. And I think that's why I was so nervous about it initially, thinking, how is this going to work? And but it actually started its life because I do some work with the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra also, and I write pieces for them. And it actually started as a song, this piece, as part of a larger project that I was working on with them. And then it dropped off that project, but it never left me, because I could feel that it had some sort of sense of difference in the way that I could approach it. Doesn't mean it was going to be easy, but I then took the simple lyrics and started to question myself constantly about how my word choice could be better, and to make sure that every word I chose was as precisely impactful as I could make it within a short sentence or phrase. Does that make sense? I'm sounding a
No,
bit complicated, but
no, it makes perfect sense. And I think knowing both that you started writing poetry and lyrics first, and then knowing that this was a song first, I think it actually makes a lot of sense, because it really seems to straddle that place, that lyrical place that sits between sort of narrative and poetry, right? It's the use of using language sparingly to say as much as possible.
yeah, that was my goal, very much so.
And how do you, when you're thinking, when you're weighing up every word, what does that process look like for you? Can you talk about what that
Yeah,
looks like?
again, it's a questioning. I'm constantly questioning things. I think there's a line in the book where the child's moving into the undergrowth, and you know, and I wanted to find the correct word to say how they were moving. And I originally wrote carefully, but in the end, I chose deftly, because it meant that they were still going to leave a footprint when they walk, a physical footprint, but the way they were walking was not going to impact as much as if they had gone in another way. So simple things like that, and it does drive me a bit mad sometimes, because I'm constantly questioning, and I come up with lots of options and lots of thought processes. And you know, like when the child says, you know, that the first, well, sorry, that when we first move into the book, and it says, wait to the wonder you find there, as they move into the forest. It's about waking to not only the physical beauty of the forest, but the wonder it beholds, the imagining wonder that you can immerse yourself in. So I had to, you know, that's another word I struggled with, because until I found, you know, yeah, I want to say wonder. You know, I want you to wonder about where you are, and not just a, a look at the beauty on a single plain sense, but to, gee, I'm getting complicated, aren't I? I'm getting, but that's how my thought process works. And so I look at the word and I think, yeah, that's what I want to say. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think what it really does is it sort of opens up this idea of language both being, you know, a tool for making meaning, but also a tool for conveying things that are a little bit beyond precise meaning or concrete meaning, right? The fact that the difference between deftly and carefully summons up a slightly different picture. It implies different things. It really speaks to the power of words and how they can be used. It makes me really think about wanting to write a sentence a couple of different ways and then swapping out a word and then seeing
Yeah.
what that feels like. It becomes which I wonder if that speaks to the teacher in you as well, as a kind of a
Yes.
process or an activity that you could use to explore um any kind of writing. It feels so connected to both your journey of discovery, but also the way that we learn about how words make something out of nothing.
Yeah, I just love playing with words. I mean, the number of drafts I did for this book was quite probably about 25, I think, in the end, because I just kept, and every time I'd revisit it, I'd want to change a little bit here and there or pull back. And I love the use, you might notice in my work, I don't know, but I love the use of pacing and ellipses and just pacing a text and making the page turn impactful. And you think about all of these things, or I do, when I sit down to work, and it's just wanting the most impact, as you said earlier, for the least amount of words you can use, and yet still have this massive. That's what the goal is. Now, whether you achieve it or not, or whether I achieve it or not, is another matter. But yeah, and there was so many times in there where I really had to sort of think that through and ponder what I was going to say and what I wanted to, and the message I wanted to get across, because I wanted to try and cover so much, Cassie. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this in a short picture book? And as I continued to pare back, I was able to cover a more worldly view as well. But it did take some time. It was probably about 4 years in the process for me before I was happy to send it to Allen and Unwin.
That is fascinating. That it's such a length of time. And I really do want to touch on this, the messages that are in the book, the meaning that's in the book, because there's a very clear message about how we move through the world, and what we take, what we give, what we can do to be custodians of the world, all these sorts of things. What were the things that were really important for you to come across? What were the meanings that you wanted to people to really, have rise off the page?
I wanted to speak to the resilience of children, the resilience, their determination. Once they're knowing, they will work to achieve. I have a great belief in children and their beautiful innocence and that they will strive to do the best that they possibly can, if they know and have the knowledge of what they perhaps need to do and what they need to look for. And writing books of any of my books, I see them as a little window into the world of understanding, so that I don't want to be didactic and say to kids, look, this is what you should be doing. I want them to walk to that little window, read my work, and walk away and think, well, what can I do? How does that affect me? Or how do I interpret that? And so with Footprint, it's that's what I wanted them to do. I wanted to say to them, in a way, I trust you. I think you're going to be able to do this. And even during the journey of the book, when they come across things that are very challenging, when there's a grey page, as they walk into a city and it's grey, and this is the challenge they've got to take up, then they identify with themselves as well and see, hey, that might be a place where I live, or where I've been, or what I've seen, or what I'd like to see, and how I can either look after it or change it.
And it's been out for a little while now, a few
Yeah.
months it's been out in the world. I would love to know about the feedback that you've received from those young readers. Have you been hearing,
It's a funny,
going on?
yeah, it's a funny experience, Cassie, when you do that, because I'm very, I stick very much to myself. You probably noticed you wouldn't found me on social media anyway, because I find very focused. But I do visit schools and I tour schools. And when the book first came out, I got my advanced copy and I was going to a school, and I hadn't actually read it for a while. I hadn't really. And then I sat down with a class and actually read it as a book for the first time the day that advanced copy arrived. And it was a very reaffirming experience for me, because, as I said, it's a different type of picture book, and I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. But gee, I walked away feeling very uplifted, and like I'd achieved my goal. And since that time, the feedback has been wonderful. It's been.
I think uplifted is such a nice word, not just for all the work that you had put into that, and all the the toil that you had spent in crafting this book, but I also think the book feels uplifting. I think it's an uplifting experience to engage
Oh,
with it.
good. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh no, I'm just thinking about how it's a lovely gift to give young readers something that talks that sort of acknowledges what's happening in the world and sort of this wonderful place that we live in and that needs some care, but does not it's hopeful and affirming and uplifting. It's something that is I guess what I'm trying to say is, I guess you come away feeling like, oh, I can easily participate in the community of people who are going to make this a lovely place to be.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, the musically when I wrote it, that part where we stop and take a breath was very strong musically, and I could feel the orchestra, you know, doing their thing musically, and a very powerful silence of words with the music taking over. And I wanted that silence, you know, I wanted kids to take that breath. And it's funny, when I was reading it, the second time I did it, they knew what was coming and they all took a breath. Breathe. Yes. And it was just so, yeah, very moving for me to see that and to be able to take that time and face that text so that they did take that moment to ponder, to breathe. And that deep breathing exercises where it calms us, makes us think, okay, what's next? And I was very happy with how that came across, because that was one thing that concerned me, because I didn't know whether it was going to interrupt the flow or whether it was going to, you know, add to the power of the flow and to the next part of the book, the next page turn, which it did. Thanks to Sally, I think.
The illustrations are absolutely
How
gorgeous.
lucky am I? Hey?
Oh goodness, yeah. And what was that process? I know that the author illustrator process varies wildly across books and across collaborations. What was the process like of working with Sally for you? How did that
Oh,
work?
look,
What was that like?
yeah, just a dream. Having done a lot of books and had lots of different experiences, we actually had a meeting like this, a Zoom meeting with the Alan Unwin team, who I've known for many years, and with Sally, and we all just sat and we chatted, and we both shared ideas, and we're both open to ideas, because the text I wrote is very open for an illustrator. You know, I never interfere with illustrators' creative space. It would just it's just too counterproductive. I can't tell you, they can't crawl inside my head and think what I'm thinking and draw what I imagine. Besides the fact I can't illustrate. So, and she just took it on board, and she just went with it. And you know, it was just a dream process. And having those discussions and chatting, and the input that she had and the input that I had just sort of complemented each other. It was just such a dream process.
I think you can see that on the page too, because there's a
Yeah,
lovely
I think
harmony between the
yeah,
images and the words.
yeah, and it's just got that beautiful naivety, and yeah, it's just, yeah, I'm very proud of it, and very proud of the combination that we were able to come up with, and able to work together like that. It's a wonderful thing. Very fortunate.
Now, I realize that you probably don't have an unbiased answer to this question, but as an educator, as a teacher yourself, um, when you think about Footprint and bringing it into the classroom, how would you like to see Footprint explored in a classroom?
The first instance, obviously, is just to read it as it's written, to pace with the text and the punctuation, to use the phrasing, because obviously, as a musician too, when you write songs, it's about phrasing, phrasing in musical terms, but it's all when you read the story, just to have that impact initially, just to share it and just read it, with every pace that's given to you in the punctuation of the text, but also obviously to explore what Sally's done, and you know, things like, you know, having a rocky climb to get to the peak of things, and the metaphorical sense of that as well as the reality of that. And you can see it all in her illustrations, and I also sort of hope that in some ways that teachers might just look at the text and remove pieces of the text and get the children to see what other word choices there might be. You know, what other words might feel I've used, and what, you know, because they'll probably come up with all the ones I tried first, you know, and maybe come up with some better ones, Cassie. I don't know. So, you know, it's about the language. It's about how the language is put there for me as the writer, how I use punctuation, how I use pacing, the words that I choose, especially words like breathe, yes, breathe, just that simple phrase, and how powerful that can be when read to the pace. Just to explore all of those things, yeah, and the descriptive terms, and you know, things like the waterfall and how I describe the shroud, and it's ghostly, and it's. I love that. I love finding that sort of language, and when I find it, I'm always so happy because, and it also imparts on the children that knowledge of how they might express themselves and the language that they can use when they're looking at the world around them and observing it, and see what phrases they can discover from just looking out a window, or sitting in a classroom, or walking to the shop, or being in their home garden, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that you can explore in certainly in relating back to the curriculum for language and literacy, for punctuation, for vocabulary. But you're right, it's almost like giving young writers permission to think creatively about how you might describe something, and thinking beyond um blue, or for
Yes,
a
yeah,
waterfall, right? Ghostly. Giving these
yeah.
other ideas of or playfulness, like permission to play with language, perhaps, which is a really
Exactly, and
lovely thing.
explore possibilities, and ask questions of, you know, what else can there, how else can I do it? What other ways? What other words can I use? What other, just because I find for me, like when I do workshops in schools, my big thing is for them to firstly write fearlessly, without any fear of making mistakes, just have a notebook, but also to constantly ask questions, and how you can build something from constantly asking questions, and it can be quite stressful sometimes. But if you keep going and you keep going, then you find a way through, and you can even build on things. I'm trying to think of an example. There's an example I use when I go to schools, and I'll say, you know, the boy is skateboarding along the footpath, but then I say to them, well, there are so many unanswered questions in that sentence. The boy is skateboarding along the footpath, but what colour is his hair? What do his eyes look like? Where's he going? What's going to happen at the end? What sounds can you hear? So just by asking those questions, then you can write a paragraph, something like, the boy with the dark spiky hair and eyes as blue as the sky took his skateboard from under his arm. The skateboard was black with a green skull painted on the surface. The skull had eyes as red as fire and brown rotting teeth. He dropped the skateboard to the ground, spread his arms like the wings of a gliding bird, and pushed himself off down the road. You know, so you then adding because you're asking questions.
That's amazing. And also, I was just about to ask what advice you'd give to young writers, and you've just answered it for me.
Question.
So
There you go.
that's amazing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
thank
good
you.
team, Cassie.
So my next question sort of follows on from this, and I'm going to adjust it slightly based on what you talked about earlier. I'm wondering if you would have advice for teachers who are looking at things like maybe wanting to create their own model text nonsense rhymes, building up pieces of writing that they can use in the classroom, but maybe not feeling confident about creating those models themselves.
Yep.
What advice would you have for teachers in that specific scenario?
Yeah, okay, gee, that's a long answer. I can give you a long answer. Look, I'll try and give you a short one. Again, I'd come back to questioning, Cassie. So, for example, if I sit here now and I've got my front window here just to my left, and I look out my front window and I say to myself, what do I see? I'm not going to write a story, but I'll do it in phrases. So if I turn the window and I'm going to say, the clouds are thick, they're grey, the sun is about to break through as it sets on below the horizon. The birds are in the bird bath. There are three of them, three little blackbirds, and they're dancing and jumping in the bird bath. Then I'd switch my attention to something else. My chair looks lonely sitting out there on the lawn. I sat there this morning and wrote. And so it's just flitting from place to place, finding phrases, and teaching yourself to question and then to use those phrases. And it might be in their classroom. if they look around their classroom, there's so many things that they could write phrases about. You know, it could be something as inanimate as the ceiling fan, you know, sitting up there, blade still, waiting for me to turn the switch to make the wind, you know, something. So then just look around and write about anything that's around them in phrasing. And that can be powerful. And if kids do that, it can be a powerful piece of writing, I think.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of this accessibility. You know, there are things in the classroom to write about. There are things outside your window to write about. There are writing things to write about are right there.
Yeah, yeah, and it can, and that's the point that sometimes we as teachers and the children need to understand, that it doesn't have to be a piece of imagining. It can be immediate, that immediacy of writing, that we're here now, what do we see? And it also helps them explore language. If they're just sitting there thinking it, and you know, I see it as a very quick 5-10 minute exercise where they just said to write fearlessly, just write, you don't have to, and they will find that hard in a way because there's all the structures that we need to use, particularly with the testing regime as it is now. You know, so we're bound by structures, unfortunately, but sometimes just maybe give them, and the teachers themselves take 10 minutes just to write freely, to write fearlessly, and just write what they see, what they feel, what they understand, and what's in front of them, rather than removing it from something else and trying to place it in some sort of framework. Yeah, the first thought for creative writing, I think, should always be just to write fearlessly.
It's a great word because it forces you to immediately acknowledge and move past the fact that there may be fear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can't get around it then. It's right there.
I mean, I often say to kids when I go to schools, I said, look, you know, I've written a lot of books, but if you said to me now, Phil Cummings, sit and write, I'd find that quite confronting, you know, because I think, well, what do you want from me? Is it okay if so, you know, I'd be questioning and trying to please who's asking me that question rather than look to myself and write creatively. Does that make sense?
Oh,
yeah,
I
sorry,
was on mute. It makes so much sense. No, I think
good. I feel like I'm raving on here. I don't know who's going to see this and probably think, gosh, this guy. But I'm just so passionate about it. I just can't help myself.
No, and the best thing is your entire audience is teachers who are passionate about English and literacy. So
Exactly.
everyone who's going to watch this is I think, right there with you, and are just looking for those moments of inspiration and possibility in the classroom. And I think we find so many of those through using quality, beautiful literature to reframe how we think. So everything that you're saying is directly related, I think, to the entire audience.
I'm glad I'm making sense, because I do tend to ramble a bit. I get carried away.
No, you haven't at all. You've answered my questions so beautifully that I'm actually at the end of my questions. So thank you so much.
Good. That's wonderful.